guys, welcome back to another video. It's Lex here. So in this video I want to talk about your walk with God and just seeing how everything is in order and trusting God's timing and everything. When we're walking in life, I think many times we might lose this maybe connection, especially when you're growing with your faith in God. Is like we have this connection to God and we have to maintain that connection and walk with God. You have to remember to kind of nourish that connection so you don't get disconnected, have daily practices with God, prayer, meditation, etc. All of these things help, to connect to the divine and to ground yourself. So you're walking with God and, everything, in a sense, like you don't need to, when you're on your journey, especially if you're like pursuing things that are more dreamful for you, you don't need to compare with everybody else on your journey, because at the end of the day, like you could say you're your own worst enemy and your own competition. Like just try to become a better version of yourself. It's not really about the competition and what's happening around you. All you need to really do is walk with God in faith and do your own journey and focus on that. And God has orchestrated everything for us, so you don't really need to worry about everything and go with the rhythm of life with God. And you don't really, like, God has everything arranged and orchestrated, like the animals, trees, and so on. Like you don't see necessarily like huge competition in nature, you could say, like other than what like God has set in nature as the laws that are for nature. Like, it kind of just does what it's supposed to do. Humans are a bit more complicated, I guess you could say. But at the end of the day, the logic here that I'm trying to say is, when you're walking with God, you just need to focus on your journey with God and focus on kind of leveling up yourself and improving yourself and becoming the best you can, and not worry about other people around you and where they're at and where they're at in life. It doesn't really matter what's happening in your life. Like, you need to focus on yourself and your own growth and your own faith journey, because that's the only thing that really matters. And then, once you're at a better stage, you can then also help other people as well with faith and everything else. And that's the most important thing, is if you don't have yourself handled and in control, you can't really help other people either. And, I think once you walk long enough with your faith in God and you're in this journey of self-improvement, you can kind of figure out that there's really no competition in a sense. Like, as in, like, it's very arbitrary, as in, like, you don't need to worry about competition because everything is already orchestrated and arranged for you, in a sense, to win, as long as you, like, keep going and do your thing. Like, you don't need to worry about the external circumstance, like, God will make a way in your life if that is meant for you and preordained for you to go forward. You don't need to really focus on, like, what everybody else is doing all the time. And that's the most important thing, is kind of like ground and focus on yourself, spend time in nature, meditate, connect with the divine. And that's really where you drive this sense of like being peaceful in all that you do. And when you come from that peaceful, joyous, abundant energy, you're going to be able to, in a sense, put that into your creations, whatever that is for you, painting, arts, whatever. Like to do, when you put that positive energy into something, it becomes a much greater creation, you could say, than when you're coming from a place of competition, negativity, always kind of like worrying about stuff and like that, instead of focusing on yourself and your own essence and energy, and coming from a positive and peaceful place when you're doing things. When you come from that energy, it's completely different when you're creating, because you're not thinking about all the external BS basically in the matrix, but you're just focusing on your own journey with God and focusing on your growth, whether this is like work you do when you're just increasing your faith in God and working to connect closer to God. Like, you don't need to necessarily compare yourself to everybody else and where they're at, and just focus on that own journey. And when you really like self-contemplate and spend time alone with God and yourself even, and God is always, of course, there, always with you. But when you just contemplate and read God's words, you pray to God, you're able to form a closer connection, and you're able to actually contemplate your true inner self and come into terms with just you being alone and doing things alone as well, I feel like it's a good way to kind of do self-love in a sense, and kind of fill yourself with peace and joy and love within yourself without needing any external things or worrying about external things in your life. That way you're able to cultivate that positive self and that loving self, and then spread that outwardly abundantly. And then like you're able to, when you know how to ground yourself and everything, you know how to come from that grounded place and do everything from that energy instead of, you know, worrying about everything external and so on. And that's kind of the beauty of like being alone, I find, and having being alone now for a while myself as well, and just kind of like figuring things out. And I think a lot of people who are walking with God go through this in their faith journeys where they're walking alone and with God and really increasing their faith and going through these changes. And I think it's really important to spend this time, and everybody should take time alone to just really improve themselves and really understand themselves better and contemplate things. Because if there's always external noise and, you know, people distracting you and whatever, and negativity coming and competition and all these and anxieties, you're never going to be able to like relax and just be with God and, you know, find that peace state and peaceful communion with God, and, you know, increasing your faith and really contemplating even on yourself and where you're at. I think it's important to take time alone and find those peaceful places where you can be alone and think and be with God. I hope this helps on your journey. That's all I really want to say in this video, is walking with God, and, you know, that it's important to, you know, be by yourself and also take time, not feel this anxiety and everything else and competition all the time and all these external things. You know, just focus on yourself, ground yourself, and continue on the journey, and remember what matters. Those who will this away. Thank you for watching. God bless. If you'd like to donate, in the description, 101s in the description as well. Thank you for watching. Amen.